Now, if classes and objects is something that often confuses new programmers, then it competes with optionals as the most confusing topic for new iOS developers. But it doesn't have to be this way. So let's spend just a couple of minutes to get really clear on what an optional is and how it works. So we've seen that it's possible to create a variable that doesn't have a value. So if I create, for example, a variable called number and give it a type of int, I don't have to set a value for number. However, if I try and use that variable, when it doesn't have a value, I'll get a nasty red error message saying that the number variable is used before being initialized. So if I want to create a variable that doesn't have a value, then what I do is add a question mark onto the end of the definition. And now that nasty error message goes away. And as we've seen before, I just see that it has a nil value when I try and look at it. So optionals allow us to use variables without values without crashing our code. But then you might be wondering, why on earth would I want to define a variable like this in the first place? Well, the odds are you don't necessarily want to define a variable like that, but you might be doing something in your code that results in an outcome that you don't know is going to have a value or not. So let's say, for example, that the user has entered some text. And that is the number 3 in a string. So remember, if the user enters some text, it will almost certainly be a string, even if they've entered it as a number. Then, what we might want to do is convert it to an integer so that we can do something with it. And we might do that with int and then user entered text. Then we can see here that that's worked out fine. It's converted it correctly to an integer. But what if the user enters mistakenly the number 3 spelled out like that? Then this is going to have a nil value because we can't convert THREE to the number 3. So then let's say we wanted to take the user entered integer and multiply it by 7, as we did for the cat years app. So we might call it something like cat age, and then take the user entered integer and multiply it by 7. So you can see straight off we've got an error, and this is the error that you'll likely see when you first encounter optionals. So value of optional type int not unwrapped. Did you mean to use exclamation mark or question mark? So this is saying that user entered integer is an optional because it might be nil. It might not work. So what we have to do is unwrap it to say, no, it's okay. I know for sure that user entered integer does have a value and you can multiply it by 7. So here, of course, that works fine. But if the user enters something like 3 written out in characters, then we'll get a horrible error because we couldn't convert it to an integer. And so we get this nasty error, unexpectedly found nil, while unwrapping an optional value. So it's taken the optional value. We've said, nope, it definitely has a value. That's fine, but it actually doesn't. So what's a good way around that then? Well, there's a construction that we'll be using over and over again that works like this. Essentially, we put an if in front of the let command. And then we don't need to use the exclamation mark. And essentially, this is saying if user entered integer has a value, then set that value equal to cat age, and then we can say print cat age multiplied by 7. And it will only attempt to do this if cat age has a value. So If we put a 4 there, it works fine. But if we go back to our 3, we don't get a crash. It just doesn't attempt to multiply it by 7. So this would be, we could put an else statement in there, show an error message to the user. So really, this is the best way to deal with optionals, is to have a line like this, which tests whether or not they have a value. And then if they do, then do whatever you want with them. If they don't, then deal with that, usually by showing some kind of error message or changing the behavior of the app accordingly. So that's really all you need to know about optionals. They're variables that may or may not have values. And if you're going to use those values, you need to be very careful and test in advance to make sure that they do in fact have a value. And the best way to do that is usually to use this if-let construction. And that's what we'll be doing throughout the course. So it's definitely good to get clear on how it works right now. Okay, so now we're in a position to finally make our Is It Prime app, which is the final app in this section. We'll start doing that in the next video.